Imagine the ground rumbling beneath your feet as a storm of steel erupts across the French countryside. Imagine a desperate German counterattack so violent, so sudden, that it threatened to tear apart the Allied advance just weeks after D-Day. And imagine everything hanging on the decisions of exhausted soldiers, broken units, and commanders who refused to let history move without them. This is the story of Operation Lüttich, Hitler's furious counterstrike at Normandy, a gamble that became one of World War II's final turning points. Hello and welcome to the channel, Forgotten WW2 Archives. Today we travel deep inside the chaos of August 1944, into a battlefield where Normandy's hedgerows echoed with gunfire and engines, roared like thunder. We explore the interiors of command rooms where decisions shaped destinies, and the exteriors of sun-scorched fields where men fought, broke, survived, or fell. In 3 parts, we unravel how Hitler attempted to reverse the tide of war, and how the Allies responded with grit, coordination, and an unshakable hold on victory. Begins inside Hitler's Eastern Prussian headquarters, the Wolf's Lair, where frustration and delusion filled the dimly lit chambers. Reports from Normandy poured in. The Allies had broken through the beaches. American, British, and Canadian forces were expanding their bridgeheads. German divisions were bleeding out under constant bombardment. Field Marshal Gu Nether von Kluge and his commanders pleaded for a strategic withdrawal. They argued for creating a defensive line aligned with reality, a line that could preserve what remained of Germany's fragmented army in France. But inside the cramped conference room, Adolf Hitler slammed his fist on the table and demanded a counterattack. In his mind, the Allies were stretched thin. He believed one massive, decisive blow could cut them off, sever their armor, and drive them into the sea. His voice echoed off the concrete walls. The attack would hit Mortain, strike toward Avranches, and slice through the American corridor. Outside this interior madness, the exterior scene in Normandy was entirely different. Dust, choked air hung above the fields. Villages had been flattened into rubble. Columns of smoke twisted skyward from burning tanks and shattered farmhouses. American units of the VI Corps pushed rapidly, seizing towns one by one. Patton's Third Army surged forward with astonishing speed, exploiting the breakout after Operation Cobra. Soldiers marched past wrecked German vehicles, abandoned artillery pieces, and the remains of desperate last-stand positions. They believed that the worst of Normandy's hell was behind them. But in the hedgerows east of Mortain, something was forming. German Panzer divisions, scraped together from what remained of their strength, were preparing the violent counterstroke Hitler demanded. Inside the German command posts around Mortain, maps covered the walls, shadows flickered from lanterns, and radio operators struggled to maintain contact through chaos and jamming. Tanks from the 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, along with the remnants of the 116th Panzer Division and elements of the 1st SS Panzer Division, assembled for the assault. Crews worked through the night, loading ammunition, inspecting engines, and whispering about the insanity of the order. Some officers knew the odds were impossible. Fuel shortages, decimated infantry, constant Allied air attacks. But orders were orders and failure was not forgiven. As darkness settled, engines rumbled to life like a beast awakening. The attack would begin at dawn, August 7, 1944. The exterior world erupted violently when morning light broke over the hills. Mortain, a quiet Norman town surrounded by forests and rolling farmland, became the center of a massive clash. German tanks surged through the mist, silhouettes of Panthers and Panzer IVs cutting across the landscape. They smashed into thin American defensive lines, spearheaded by the 30th Infantry Division. The shock was overwhelming. Radio crackled frantically. Outposts fell. Some American units were overrun entirely. The German advance pushed westward, threatening to carve a deadly wedge toward Avranches. For a few hours, it seemed Hitler's dream of reversing the Allied breakout might actually unfold. Mortain was engulfed in flames. Civilians hid in cellars as walls trembled. German infantry stormed through streets littered with debris, while American soldiers fought house to house, refusing to give ground. Inside the American command centers, tension swept through every room. Officers leaned over maps, tracing German movements with trembling fingers. Reports flowed in rapidly. Tanks approaching from the east, positions overrun, line broken at several points. But the Americans had one decisive advantage: absolute air supremacy. Once the morning fog lifted, the skies opened to the roar of Allied aircraft. Exterior scenes transformed instantly as P-47 Thunderbolts swooped down, releasing rockets that streaked across the battlefield. German columns became hunted prey. Explosions tore through armor. Panzer crews abandoned burning machines. The sky was filled with ash flame and the thunder of relentless airstrikes. Continues from a vantage point inside Hill 314, one of the most dramatic defensive stands of the entire Normandy campaign. On this hill, overlooking Mortain, about 700 men of the 2nd Battalion, 120th Infantry Regiment had dug in. Their interior world consisted of foxholes, shattered stone walls, and makeshift positions crowded with wounded comrades. By dawn, they were surrounded on all sides. German forces encircled the hill, cutting phone lines and blocking reinforcements. Mortain below them burned like a furnace. The men on Hill 314 faced constant attacks. Artillery barrages that shook the ground, machine gun bursts ripping through the air, and snipers who stalked every exposed movement. Inside those cramped positions, soldiers rationed water, bandaged wounds, and held their rifles with grim determination. Their radio operator, though nearly deafened by explosions, kept sending desperate messages. "We are surrounded, but we will hold." From the exterior perspective on the hilltop, the panorama told an entirely different story. A vast battlefield of movement and destruction. Columns of German armor pushed toward the hill, attempting to dislodge the defenders. Every field and road below churned with smoke, but the Americans' elevated position allowed them to direct devastating artillery fire. Allied batteries miles away rained shells onto advancing German troops. Watching from the hilltop, soldiers could see enemy tanks burst into flames as shells found their targets. The defenders' survival depended on grit, luck, and the unbreakable will to deny the Germans a single inch. Inside German command rooms, frustration boiled. Hitler demanded victory. He called repeatedly, insisting that Mortain must be taken, that Avranches must be cut off, and that the American spearhead must be crushed. Von Kluge and Hauser attempted to explain the impossible situation. The Allies controlled the skies, fuel was nearly gone, and heavy losses had gutted the attacking units. But the Führer dismissed every report as exaggerated. He accused his generals of lacking will. He declared that failure to execute the plan would be treason. His voice, distorted through scratchy field telephones, deepened the desperation of commanders already trapped in unwinnable chaos. Exterior battles intensified as day after day the Germans hurled themselves forward. American aircraft flew hundreds of sorties, shredding armored spearheads. The countryside around Mortain became a graveyard of tanks. Panthers with melted armor, half-tracks ripped apart, trucks overturned and burning. American soldiers moved cautiously through fields littered with craters and smoking wreckage, retaking lost ground. Each night brought fierce counterattacks as German infantry tried to retake positions under cover of darkness. Each sunrise brought another wave of Allied fighters and bombers. The rhythm of battle was merciless. Begins with the collapse of Operation Lüttich, seen from inside a German medical field station on the campaign's final days. Doctors worked frantically amid moans, blood, and the stench of burning fuel. They treated soldiers with shrapnel wounds, burns, and broken spirits. Many survivors spoke of the relentless Allied planes, of tanks struck from above, of entire platoons erased by artillery. Officers arrived with grim orders: withdraw, regroup, retreat toward Falaise. Hitler's grand counterattack, launched with dreams of glorious reversal, had devolved into a desperate attempt to escape encirclement. Von Kluge, exhausted and feeling betrayed, later ended his life, leaving behind a note describing his inability to carry out the impossible demands of a leader separated from reality. Outside this failing interior world, the exterior landscape of Normandy transformed again into a scene of Allied dominance. American units advanced steadily, pushing the Germans back across the countryside. Villages were liberated. Roads once filled with retreating Allied casualties now saw columns of American and French armor moving forward. The failure at Mortain meant the German front could not be stabilized. The Allies were free to close the Falaise pocket, a massive encirclement that would trap tens of thousands of German troops and shatter the Wehrmacht in France. Operation Lüttich, intended to save the German position in Normandy, instead accelerated its destruction. Inside an American briefing tent near Avranches, officers reviewed after-action reports. They recognized the bravery of the 30th Infantry Division, the defenders of Hill 314, the pilots of the 9th Air Force, and the countless infantrymen who refused to yield, even when enemy tanks rolled over their positions. Cigarette smoke drifted in the dim light as commanders discussed the next phase, pushing toward the Seine, liberating Paris, and driving the Germans back toward their homeland. The sense of momentum was overwhelming. The tide had fully turned. Exterior scenes across Normandy in the aftermath of Operation Lüttich were a mix of triumph and tragedy. Fields were littered with burned vehicles. Civilians slowly emerged from hiding, stepping over rubble and shattered glass. Farmhouses that once offered peace now bore scars of war. Yet flags rose again in liberated towns, crowds cheered Allied soldiers, and for the first time since D-Day, the road to victory seemed clear. The German army, battered and broken, fled eastward. For many of its soldiers, the counterattack at Mortain was the moment they realized the war was lost. In the final reflection, Operation Lüttich stands as a symbol of the catastrophic decisions born from authoritarian control. Hitler's refusal to accept reality, his belief in an immediate counterblow, and his disconnect from the battlefield pushed thousands of his own troops into a hopeless attack. Meanwhile, the American response showcased the evolving strength of Allied coordination infantry, artillery armor, and air power working together in ways that reshaped modern warfare. Mortain became a turning point, not because of grand strategies alone, but because ordinary soldiers held their ground, pilots braved enemy fire, and commanders used intelligence to outmaneuver desperation. The countryside of Normandy absorbed it all. The smoke, the steel, the sacrifice. Operation Lüttich failed spectacularly, sealing the fate of German forces in France. And as the Allies marched east, the war's final chapters came into focus. Normandy had been the crucible. Mortain was the last gamble. And from its ashes, victory began to accelerate.